So this diffusion of CO2 and O2 at this respiratory membrane is basically what we're able to do when we have hemoglobin being transported on the red blood cell. And then as far as CO2 transport within the blood, we'll talk about that in just a moment. But keep in mind that we are talking about external respiration because here we are at this place where the external environment here with this air environment is meeting up with this internal environment of the blood vessels and tissues and that kind of thing. So this is still external respiration because we're exchanging gas between the external environment and the body. So here we see CO2 coming back from the tissues and being dumped into the alveoli. That's external respiration. And your book has a lot of really good diagrams of this. All right. So here's a little closer look at this transport of oxygen on the molecule hemoglobin. When hemoglobin picks up these oxygen molecules, it becomes known as oxyhemoglobin. All right. So there's just basically a couple of different ways that we transport oxygen through the body. And I think you already know well that oxygen is needed in every single tissue cell in the body. So that's how it gets to it. Carbon dioxide is transported a little differently. It basically transports in this really funky chemical package called bicarbonate. We don't really have time to go into a lot of that, but if you love chemistry, look into it because it's really, really cool. Here it's just talking about the chemical changes that happen as CO2 is released into the alveoli. When we switch to internal respiration, now we are at the tissue cells. Okay, so the blood has been brought to the tissue cells. The oxygen has been carried in that blood on the red blood cell, on hemoglobin. Here we have diffusion just like before, but this is happening at a different location at the tissues rather than in the lungs. This is a great diagram. I recommend you study it. It's got the different external respiration, internal respiration on the diagram listed pretty well, different oxygen concentrations listed on those tables. Okay, so shifting here to talking about control and regulation of respiration, we know neural has to do with the nervous system. So when we talk about different muscle groups that are activated by the nervous system, this is called neural regulation of respiration. So when we're looking here, we're seeing that these intercostal muscles and the diaphragm muscle are being activated by these respiratory centers, the pons, the medulla. Now remember, those have to sense that there's, either too much CO2 in the blood, not enough oxygen in the blood, that kind of thing. The heart has some sensors for that. The brain has sensors for that. And these are the centers of the brain that control respiration rate, the respiration depth. Those are really well discussed in your book, so definitely look into that. Okay. When we talk about normal respiratory rate, we're talking about a term called eupnea. All right. Hyperpnea is just like before. When we see hyper, we know that means elevated. So this would mean elevated rate of respiration. And the body usually causes this. You notice at times that you breathe faster. That's the body's response to the brain saying, hey, we need to get a little bit more oxygen. It could also mean we need to get rid of more CO2. Here's a great diagram showing just the different control centers, the different triggers of the nerves. All right. And the specific nerves that are important here are going to be your phrenic nerves and your intercostal nerves. Now, there's some other things that can affect your rate of respiration. If you have increased body temperature or if you're exercising, remember that we're trying to offload heat at the same time. So, respiration is another way we can get rid of heat. So lots of different things can affect how deeply and how quickly or slowly you are breathing. A huge part of controlling respiratory rate and depth is chemical. In fact, probably the main reason would be CO2 levels in the blood. Now, we can't have the blood being poisoned, excuse me, by an increased level of CO2 because